Evolutionary.org podcast coming your way, episode 514. Steve and the Mobster joining me. How's it going, man?
This is a good one. I'm looking kind of forward to this in a perverse kind of way, as you know from the pre-show, Steve. So let's hit it.
So this is one I've been asked about over the years quite a bit, especially 10, 15 years ago. Not so much today. I think it may have, kind of become obsolete, but we're going to talk about it anyway, because if you ever train with a lot of endurance people, CrossFitters, stuff like that, runners, triathletes, bicyclists, all that stuff, you may have heard of AICAR, A-I-C-A-R. And we're going to talk about the dosing, cycles, benefits, side effects of using this really, really interesting peptide. So, and the dosing is very, very interesting on it. Mobster and I were kind of crunching the numbers before the show. So the chemical name, I apologize in advance if I butcher it, but now you see why we just call it AICAR or ICAR. 5-amino imidazole -4-carboxamide ribonucleotide. And it's a peptide. It's an intermediate within the generation of iosine monophosphate and directly related to metabolic regulation. The most important mechanism AICAR is known for is its ability to block enzymes, both intracellular and extracellular levels. And this allows for an accelerated stimulation of glucose uptake and increased protein kinases in skeletal muscle tissue. So now you see why a lot of people really have an interest in this peptide, because this is the stuff that can turn you from a marathon or half marathon. Let's say half marathon, you run a 1 hour, 45-minute half marathon. Taking this stuff, you can really do some damage when it comes to knocking down your time by 5-10 minutes. On a 5K, you can knock your time down up to a minute. I mean, taking this stuff. And now you see why people don't mind spending the kind of money that it takes for this stuff. Both these functions allow more energy conversion. That's going to help you sustain output from activity. So you're going to be able to push harder and longer. I can't imagine being a professional athlete, let's say soccer player, or in your case, Mobster, what you guys call it, football. And we're doing this podcast around the time of the World Cup. Wouldn't it be something if all of these soccer players were on ICAR? Because it's going to help them. Well, I mean, hey, that's the stuff you got to do. So, I mean, if everyone was doping with this stuff, these guys could play the entire soccer game. The strikers could play the entire soccer game without having to be shuffled in and out. And I think the rules with the World Cup is you're only allowed to be shuffled in and out once, right, Mobster? I'm not an expert on soccer, but
I'm not an expert either, Steve. I'm just thinking, I know that some of the top players, the kind of salaries they get, and whether it's pro ball in your side of the ocean or soccer on my side, and as you said, the World Cup, those are, bearing in mind, because we're going to talk about the numbers in a short while, as you know, those probably could afford to do it for something like the World Cup. But as we'll get into the numbers, and you'll see just how crazy they are later on, listeners. Anyway, back to you, Steve.
Yeah, and ICAR, obviously, it's banned by any sports organizations. The WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency, has it banned. And, I could imagine pretty much every league, has it banned for that reason. It's giving you basically an unfair advantage. And if you guys actually look into, soccer players and stuff, it's littered with soccer players suspended, soccer players caught, soccer players busted for doping. And look, they have a lot of stuff on there. We see GW as a banned substance, and they talk about GW, and they also talk about ICAR in the same breath as ones that they're really, really looking for when it comes to these guys who are doping. So this stuff, look, if they're banning it, this stuff works.
Yes.
It also helps with burning fat. And as an endurance athlete and as a bodybuilder, that might be something that you really like. And it doesn't burn the fat by doing, it's not like a stimulant where you take it, it kills your appetite, you're able to perform. No, this stuff directly alters these two functions in your body that we talked about, the glucose uptake and the protein kinases. And that is going to help your body burn fat without you having to crash calories, without you having to, do anything differently. It's just going to naturally do it. So these are the two advantages. But so this is why a lot of athletes, bodybuilders, and scientists have really studied this over the years. And it was something that was really popular at one time, really, really popular. And I know that because 10, 15 years ago on the forums, I'd have people hit me up and they'd want to know about AICAR. They want to know where they could get it. They want to know all this kind of stuff. So very hard to get back in those days. Even today, it's very hard to get because it's so expensive and a lot of sources don't even bother with it. But we'll get into the cost in a little bit. Another thing that AICAR has been shown to protect against is ischemic injury. And what that is, it's a type of injury related to the restriction of blood to tissues. So that's going to cause an insufficient amount of oxygen and glucose to keep the tissue alive. So if you have that issue, thrombosis, embolisms, vasoconstriction are a threat, and that can help with that. It can also allow for more proper blood flow to the myocardium, which is your heart. So AICAR could be fundamentally used to treat heart muscle in the aftermath of a heart attack. It can definitely help reduce the chances of ischemic injuries in the future. So that's interesting. Obviously, consult with a doctor. I mean, don't go giving your uncle or grandpa who had a heart attack AICAR. Obviously, you want to. This is something you want to work with your doctor on. Look, abnormal growth of heart tissues and heart valve function have been altered in animal studies that use the peptide AICAR, which could be a downside. So abusing this stuff is going to have an effect too. So this is some serious stuff. This is something that, we've seen guys. I'm talking guys at the level of Lance Armstrong who they have money to burn. They want to win. They'd rather spend half their life savings to win because they know that more money is going to come in if they can win, right? So these are the types of people who are going to take something like this, and they're not as worried as the downside, which is heart valve function alteration. They're not worried about that right now. They're worried about winning right now. So I think your average Joe Mobster, this isn't something that you would be interested in. But if you're someone who's at a really high level, this is one you could really, really, really benefit from.
Let me jump in for here a second here, Steve. I know, not that I follow soccer because I don't, but I've read up on the contracts and the way that the contracts, because it was a big deal a few years ago with bribes and backhanders and all this kind of stuff going on for the managers of certain star players. And again, this is soccer and Pro Bowl. So you get a salary, guys, you get a salary, and the salary is considerable, but you might not want to spend. What you also get is you get bonuses. And if, for example, Steve, you scored the winning goal, the winning touchdown, you get more money. If your team wins, you get more money. So you go, when we tell you guys the numbers in a minute that we think this would cost, the average Joe's typical salary in the States, forget it, right? It's kind of almost you've got to win the lottery. But if you're playing at the level that we're talking about, including Lance Armstrong, if he wins the Tour de France back in the day, the bonus more than covers the costs that he would have spent in order to win the race using something like this, assuming that he did. So it's one of those kind of situations where in this particular set of circumstances, if you're at the very top of your game, whether it's pro ball in America, whether it's soccer here in the UK, or as Steve says in the World Cup right now, or Lance Armstrong riding the Tour de France or whatever, that suddenly becomes almost the math makes sense, Steve, because not only are you on $2, $3, $4, $5 million a year or more, and that's across all those sports, but the bonuses, win the race, your team wins, you win the league, you win the whole thing, you win the World Cup. even with our teams in the World Cup, and I'm talking about Wales, Scotland, England, whatever, and we're talking about taking people out of soccer teams that are incredibly well paid already, they get a kind of bonus scheme even for that. And this, the bonus, if they win the World Cup, would just about cover the cost of running this the way that we're talking about, guys. But again, when we give you the numbers, we were talking about daily doses, Steve. So I'd want to run it for, even at their level, very, very short periods of time. But again, we're talking about people that are obsessed with winning. We get that, we understand it. And we're giving you this information because it's out there. As Steve said, it gets asked about. I looked on the forums, it gets asked about. So it's there. We give you the information. If you've got the wallet that can manage it, crack on. Anyway, back to you, Steve.
Let's talk a little bit about, and if you guys can want to chime in the comments, educate us a little bit about how the World Cup subs use, because I thought I watched it one time. They're like, oh, you can only sub a certain player once, but I don't know, because I just Googled it and it says like you can do like 2 or 3 subs or something. I don't really understand the rules. So post in our comments, guys, if you know that answer, just for future reference. But I know if you're sprinting and you're on the field and you're running up and down and you're a striker or you're a winger, I used to play soccer. I mean, you need a lot of endurance for that shit. So we used to always, when I used to play soccer, we used to always run like for 45 minutes before practice just to increase our endurance. So look, at the end of the day, let's talk about a little bit more about how AICAR works. And what it does is the metabolic pathways to block certain enzymes, and that's going to allow AMP activated protein kinase. This is why, and I'm going to explain this like this. When you're taking a bunch of AICAR, it tricks your body at a cellular level, and it to make you think that exercise has just been done. Since the body thinks it has just done a lot of exercise, energy cycle at the cellular level starts converting fuel sources, for example, fatty acids, to output the energy that was thought to have been spent during exercise. This can have a direct effect on the level of endurance activity and the sustainability of the activity. So you're going to be able to push much harder, much longer. Insulin sensitivity is also noted to be one action that AICAR produces. So the body will think it just went through a series of exercises. So it's exercise on a bottle. And in animal studies with obese mice, AICAR showed that all the peptides benefits for obese diet-induced mice, yet the healthy lean mice did not reap any of the benefits of insulin sensitivity or increase in glucose uptake. So the application in bodybuilding does not seem very suitable. So these mechanisms are targeted for the out of shape and overweight. So if you're not a top level endurance athlete, like I said earlier, I don't see any reason to use AICAR. If you're a guy who just does CrossFit on the weekends, I don't see a reason to do AICAR. This is for people who you're traveling like I used to do and you're competing in endurance. I could see you using this. Because as we are going to get into, the financial aspect of using AICAR is insane. So, and we can go ahead, Mobster, look, we can compare it to carbon. So I'll say it straight up, because Mobster is going to come in here and Mobster is going to help us out. And we're going to talk about kilograms and pounds. So in the United States, for those of you who live outside the United States, is one of only, I believe, 3 countries in the world, or 2, correct, that still don't use the metric system. So in the United States, we go by pounds. Mobster's side of the pond, they go with kilograms. And so we're going to kind of touch on that. But look, at the end of the day, I could say it straight up. Cardarine GW 501, 516. You can run 20 milligrams of cardarine, and it's going to cost you about 70 or 75 bucks a month. And you can run 20 milligrams a day and get very similar benefits to the AICAR. So now, Mobster, I'm going to bring you in here, and you can kind of go over how much AICAR we have to use and how much it's going to cost you, so we can kind of compare. And, at the end of the day, you've got to kind of also consider, too, AICAR isn't sold by a lot of companies that sell peptides. And so if you go and you buy a bunch of AICAR online, are you getting the real stuff?
That's what I was thinking,
and or B, Has the real stuff been sitting on the shelf for months because there's not much demand for AICAR? And if it's been sitting on the shelf for months, by the time it gets to you and you mix it, it's probably not even going to be dosed correctly, right? It's going to be very weak. So Mobster, come in here and explain the math here.
Yeah.
I'm going to do you that honor.
Guys, if you look at the dosage that you're supposed to take, and Steve and I were discussing briefly in the pre-show what was an effective dose. So although studies still need to take place, it's not being one that's studied a lot, probably again because it's so goddamn expensive. And so the initial studies that looked at AICAR were basically talking about 500 milligrams per kilogram, which is 2.2 pounds of body weight. So I did the math on the basis of a typical bodybuilder weighing, say, somewhere around 200 pounds. There's articles that we're referencing when we're talking to you that refer to endurance athletes weighing 140 pounds. But let's stick with the 200 just for now, Steve, because that's the maths that we've done. Now, what we know is that some of the articles, some of the forums are talking about 5 milligrams a day, 10 milligrams a day, and so on and so forth. Here's the problem, guys. It's simple maths. And really, and this is how most of us train, when we spend money on supplements, when we spend money on performance-enhancing drugs, when we spend money on steroids, the great and vast majority of us are doing it out of a disposable income. Steve, you know, we run the maths before the show. And based on the kind of numbers, it used the cost, and it has come down in price, guys. So the numbers have been adjusted. I ran the numbers through a calculator, and I come up with the following figures. So $100 a gram, which is what it used to cost. You'd be looking at just it's 500 milligrams, so that's 50, and that's per kilogram of body weight. So a 200-pound bodybuilder is 90 kilograms, which comes out to, in very simple maths, $5,400 a day. Sorry, per dose, right? So we was running the numbers back and forth, and we talked about 50 milligrams and 5 milligrams. So here's what I talked about with Steve before in the pre-show. I said it's the idea of a kind of cheap way of doing it, which still works at several hundreds of dollars per goddamn day against the effective dose. And I used an analogy of glucosamine sulfate. You can find companies online, companies in your high street, in your shopping malls, that will sell you what they claim is a monthly amount in a bottle. And when you look at it, it works out to be in 400 milligrams a day. But the actual effective dose in pretty much every study that I've ever looked at is 1,500 milligrams a day. So really, your monthly supply works out to about a week and a half. This is the kind of same principle. The idea that you could take 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams and get the same kind of effects that were seen when they were dosing it properly in the initial studies, and they were talking about 500 milligrams per kilogram or 500 milligrams per 2 pounds body weight. And that's, so you have to multiply by how many times 2 pounds you weigh. A 200-pound, that would be 100 times, and then the cost, and you could suddenly get into the hundreds, and in fact, as I said, thousands of dollars, Steve, which is absolutely crazy. Now, like I said at the beginning, if you're a high-end athlete, even a marathon runner, some of the real top runners in the world are on serious money, Steve. Great sponsorship, whether that's with Adidas or Nike or whatever, you know, and that could be the multiple millions of dollars. And again, if they break the world record in the marathon, if they win a super fantastic, highly sponsored marathon competition, say in New York or London or wherever, then almost the bonuses can kind of cover the costs. It certainly can in Tour de France type endurance riding. It does in soccer, it does in Pro Ball. But for the great and vast majority of the rest of us, to run it at the effective dose, the suggested effective dose, is in the thousands of dollars per day. And that's even with the reduced price that's available now. We looked online before we started this podcast, and trust me, guys, it's probably going to be one of those things that dates very, very quickly. But the current price is somewhere between $45 and $60 for 50 milligrams. And you are supposed to be running 10 times that amount per kilo, per 2.2 pounds. So you can do the math yourself. It's suddenly just to run the 1 kilogram body weight dosage is $600, and if you weigh 90 kilos, 200 pounds, it's 90 times that amount, Steve. So it just becomes absolute 90 times 600. I think off the top of my head, and we looked at this before the show, was $54,000. It was something absolutely crazy. So the maths, regardless, we can argue about the maths back and forth, Steve. We can double check it, and we'll be sure to put something in the article just to give you a vague indication of what the price is right now and what it would cost. But trust me, guys, it's in the thousands of dollars, if not the tens of thousands of dollars per day. And that's to run it, as I said, an effective dose, not a suggested dose, not a dose that you've seen some people taking online, not even a dose that some companies that supply you with a peptide are suggesting. If the study that took place and showed these results was using this amount, that's the recommended amount. They didn't study less, and it hasn't happened yet. They haven't studied more. They studied it on the basis of 500 milligrams per kilo, per 2.2 pounds, and that is in the thousands of dollars per day. I can't reiterate that point so much, Steve. We talked about other peptides. The obvious one is growth hormone itself, and back in the day, Steve, it'd be $500 a month. This is in the thousands of dollars per day area. I would argue, like Steve said, that if it's too cheap, it ain't legit. It's just as susceptible to the sunlight and heat and cold as all the other peptides. And at the price that you're paying to try and get something out of it, I would want to be in the laboratory, Steve, and having them jabbing me right then and there, straight from the test tube to my ass, right from the test tube to my shoulder. And I'm just handing over wads of cash. So, yeah, like Steve says, I mean, not only that, I want to get into the side effects a little bit as well, Steve. There's a potential issue here in terms of the side effects. So we've talked about the plus, which is the benefit of healing of the heart, and for specific reasons that Steve's already stated. One of the issues, and he's mentioned it earlier on, was growth of the heart. Now, pretty much every athlete ever enlarges their heart. If you work hard, especially if you're doing endurance, your heart is working hard, and it compensates by thickening of the walls, growing, and so on and so forth. And so most athletes have a slightly enlarged heart, a bigger heart than a human being that doesn't train as heavy as we do, or doesn't run as much as the cyclists do, or the footballers do, or the Pro Bowl players do. And so it's not unusual for them to have enlarged hearts. Obviously, what happens here is I would be concerned, Steve, and I said this in the pre-show, if you already have a slightly enlarged heart from training, from the things that we do, from the endurance, from the weightlifting, from whatever, so enlarging it again as a potential side effect is essentially going to cause problems. And the obvious thing is, Steve, I think is interfering with the heartbeat on the simple case of, and I believe I'd have to double check this, but guys, you please feel free to correct me in the comments. The heart beats up against the side of the rib cage because it's got so big, and that creates an irregular heartbeat. And so now you're having essentially what amounts to, I think it's arrhythmia. So it amounts to, if not a full-blown heart attack, it's just going to cause you problems anytime that you're under strain. And again, that would be running, playing soccer, playing pro ball, or lifting weights or whatever, guys. So it's one of these things. We give you this information, but I'm telling you, goddamn expensive to run it properly. I can't see that there's something I'd want to run cheaply either, Steve. And some of our listeners will have high levels of disposable income. So we allow for those listeners to say, if I want to take it, please tell me what to do, what dosage I'm supposed to do, and so on and so forth. And that's what we do in this podcast. But bottom line is, guys, the average Joe, as Steve said earlier on, in America, here in the UK, in Europe, or anywhere else in the world that our listeners come from, will not have, in my opinion, the disposable income to run this effectively at the dosages that were found to be effective in the studies that have been done to date. I've talked about one of those tips that we talked about for peptides and for other performance enhancing drugs that we've covered in this podcast. And it's quite simple, guys. Sometimes people try to be a little bit cheap. And here's what I always suggest. And it came from, again, the late roid guru, PD guru, Paul Burrison, and indeed, he's still with us, Mick Hart, a steroid guru here in the UK. And both of those suggested that literally you save up your money for your growth, save up your money for your insulin if you're going to run it, save up your money for your peptides, save up your money to run a cycle properly, fill up your freezer with steaks and vegetables and all the other things that you're going to use, and do the cycle properly. Don't do it half-assed. Run the right dosages, run protocols how they're supposed to be run, and then you'll get the best results. Here's the issue is quite simple. It's economics. AICAR is so goddamn expensive that it's just beyond most of us to run it in the way that I think it should be run, Steve. And it's as simple as that. Back to you.
I think the absolute minimum dosage, like if I'm gonna absolute minimum dosage, we're talking 100 milligrams per day. So if you're running 100 milligrams a day and each vial is about $50, so you're blowing $100 a day for this stuff. And that's not even a dosage that's really going to be beneficial, as Mobster explained. So really, you know, we're talking 1,000, 2,000 milligrams a day that you're going to have to run it. So we're talking $1,000 a day, you know?
Easy.
So look, but if you want to do it, take it an hour or two before your workout, before you're going to do your marathon, before you're going to do your 5K, see what it does for you. But here's the thing. Here's why it's so expensive. There's not enough of this stuff being produced. There's no mass production of this stuff. No. So it's just a simple supply and demand thing. But my main concern, Mobster, is what I said earlier on the show. If you go online and you find it for, let's say, $10 a vial instead of $60 a vial, you know, you really think you're getting legit stuff? No, I mean, it's going to be fake, and you're going to be like, wow, it's so cheap. Let me buy $100 worth of this shit. And you're going to buy 10 vials of it, and then it's going to be fake. It's probably going to be like Clen. You're probably going to end up injecting Clen, and then Clen's going to mess with your heart, and you're like, oh, this AICAR is making me stimulated. You know, it's doing something. So, look, I mean, you know what I'm saying? If you have a really, really trusted peptide place that you really, really trust, and they back their stuff up, you can try this. This is not a hormone. So you can just try. If you've got a big half marathon or a marathon coming up and you just want to try this shit, you know, I would try it before your a training session where you're going to do a long, like say you're going to do an hour and a half tempo run. I would take it before that and see if it helps, see what it does, see if it causes any issues. And then if you're like, wow, this stuff really helped me, I ran the same distance in an hour and a half as I usually run in an hour 40 minutes. So you're gonna be like, wow, it took 10 minutes off my time. So now you know, hey, I can buy a bunch of this stuff, spend $1,000, and then use it before my marathon. Do you want to spend an extra $1,000 to take 10 minutes off your marathon? It's worth it to a lot of those guys that go out there. It really is. Or a triathlon, you train your whole year for the triathlon. Is it worth it? Spend $1,000 to do it. You're already spending all that money to travel out to Hawaii to do the Ironman triathlon. Your bicycle costs what? How much, Mobster? $5,000-$6,000 for one of those bicycles?
5 to 10,000, Steve.
Yeah,
5 to 10,000 minimum.
And you got to pay to ship it there. When I used to train with these guys, that was their big concern. That was their big stress. Like, how am I supposed to get this thing there? Oh, the airline charges me a fortune just to put it on the plane. And what happens if the airline, they put it on the plane, they throw boxes and someone else's luggage on top of your bike and they break your bike, you know? So that was their big concern. So a lot of these guys just have it shipped there by like a FedEx or UPS or something. They have it shipped straight to their hotel room. I don't know. But look, my point is these guys spend a lot of money on this shit. So if it's worth it to them to spend $1,000 to shave 5 or 10 minutes off their time. So in that situation, it's worth it. For the rest of you, don't waste your time with AICAR. Try GW instead, and go from there. We do have sponsors on our forum that do have GW, by the way. So you guys can come on our forum and find those. And GW does this pretty much the same thing as the AICAR does, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper. We're talking $70 a month to run GW daily. It would cost you $70 a month, which is what, Mobster, about what, 50 cents a day compared to $1,000.
As you say, 50, half a dollar a day, guys, about 40 something pence a day, which is fantastic. And as you said, Steve, pretty much every single thing that you want from AICAR, you're getting from GW. So there are, unless you are, as I said before, a high-end athlete with that kind of disposable income, or you're looking at bonuses for winning a race or winning a match, or scoring a touchdown or whatever, the maths just don't add up. But again, I kind of understand it. If I was in that situation, if I was on hundreds of thousands of pounds per week, $400,000 a week, 40, $50 million a year. And if I score the winning touchdown, there's another 10, 15, 20, $30,000 in it for me. And that's just from the team, never mind from my sponsors and whoever else that I'm associated with, Coca-Cola or Nike or whatever, Steve. Then the maths kind of do add up. And you are looking, all the other athletes that you're coming up against, Steve, are high-end athletes. We're not talking about, as you said, doing a 5K or a 10K on the weekend with some buddies, or even, we have something over here called park run, where it could be a couple of hundred people running around the local park. But then why would they spend tens of thousands of dollars to win the local race, even if my numbers were good nationally? It's just the maths just doesn't add up, Steve. I think something else as well, and I'm just looking here at the summary of the side effects. Anecdotally, some logs online have indicated extremely loose bowels, dry mouth, and a lack of hunger. Now, you're already running, if you're an endurance athlete, because that's what it's really aimed at, and burning calories just to be, and these people fuel up and pass the Steve, same as a cyclist, etc., etc. Do you really want to not be able to eat, which means you're running off zero energy from food, it's just using body fat and glycogen, and at the same time, and especially this has happened to marathon runners, Steve, with extremely loose bowels. There are photographs online, guys, if you care to look them up, of people, and I'll be crude here, who have shit themselves running a marathon. I don't want that as a side effect. I'll touch on something that I've said in previous shows when I talk about the extreme, the harder drugs, and the drugs with the greater side effects tend to be the ones that create the most muscle tissue, Steve, or the greatest strength, or give you the best endurance. But they always seem to come with the worst side effects. And I'll use the obvious one here, Steve, when we talk about tren, whether it's transomnia, the tren sweats, whether it's the dementia, like its side effects in older gentlemen that we're using tren for medical reasons. The side effects are going to be extreme because the effect that you're asking for is an extreme one. Look at what Steve said at the beginning when he talks about how one of the aims of the drug when it was being developed was for the extremely obese. And I said before, in other podcasts, that the extremely overweight would require extreme members. And as Steve said, he almost called it, fat loss in a bottle. But look at the financial side again. If it was a miracle pill that was $100 and we all dropped 30 pounds on it, we'd all be running out there with $100 right now. Let's get lean tomorrow. And no side effects, amazing. It doesn't exist. This is thousands of dollars per day to have something like that effect, and then you're going to be sitting on the toilet in the John, shitting your brains out. So yeah, pretty much every super crazy fat loss drug we've seen has ended up as something like that, Steve, where the oil and the fats are not being absorbed at all, and that's ended up with incredibly loose stools, and you are literally, as we say here in the UK, shitting your brains out. So guys, I for me, and I'll do the conclusion here, Steve. The conclusion is simple as this: the cost and the potential side effects make it have no real use for the majority of sports and or our listeners that train with weights to bodybuild, to add muscle and to get leaner. It's touted as exercise in a bottle, but most athletes are not sitting around doing nothing. So you guys are already doing the thing that's going to enable you to get some benefit. The same applies to calorie in that particular example again, Steve. You can't sit around on your backside, on your ass, and expect to get super fit or super lean. You get some effect, but you'll get so much more if you're out exercising. So calling something exercise on a bottle is fine, but most of you will already be training. You'll already be doing your cardio. You'll already be hopefully eating cleaner than you was before and trying to get it to even better, eat cleaner in the future. So you're already doing as many of those things as possible. Cardio, in my mind, Steve, as you said, probably where I would go to. It's so much cheaper. It kind of boosts your energy in terms of allowing you to do more cardio and feeling better while you're doing more cardio, and allowing you to metabolize fat better. So in other words, you do the exercise and the exercise becomes more effective, as opposed to doing no exercise, which is a suggestion that would come from AICAR with the exercise in the bottle. You're not sitting around doing nothing, guys. You're out there killing it, and that's exactly what we want you to do. So, like we said earlier on, unless you're a top professional endurance athlete or soccer player or pro ball, something like that, the money, the difference between you and the next guy makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, then to me, it's just going to be. I'd have to sell my house, Steve, just to run like a daily dose, and that's just crazy. You'd have to
Buddy,
literally,
you
guys.
gotta pick either a roof over your head, or
Yeah,
if you're gonna
all
take your
this.
training seriously, okay? So yes, you will be selling your house. You will do
Yeah,
it, and then you'll be homeless on the street just so you could have got an extra 5 minutes on your marathon.
you sell your Mustang, and you've probably only got enough. If it's a second-hand used Mustang, you've got enough for half a day's effective dose, guys. Sell your Ferrari, and you might have enough for 2 days dosage. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. It's that kind of craziness. But again, high-end athletes, Steve, I can understand it. If you're the kind of guy that's turning up in a Ferrari, and you're getting paid to train at the training ground, and you're getting sponsorship just for going to restaurants and stuff like that, and they're paying you like $1 million a year just to wear their trainers, then this makes sense, because everybody else that you're up against is going to be looking for an edge. They want to keep their contracts. They want their contracts renewed. It makes sense in that way. I get it. But honestly, guys, the difference between this and Carter, I would go with Carter in 10 times over 100 times before I would even think about living in the streets, living in a tent, just fuck the roof over my head, motherfucker. I need this stuff right now. Tell you what this comes down to for me, Steve, and you mentioned it earlier on. And I know this because I've had these kind of conversations with buddies way before I was on Evo and before talking about this kind of podcast and doing this kind of information. Here's what we would do, and here's why I think this is a fascinating one. We would sit around and talk about what cycle would you do if you run the lottery? What would be the most amazing protein? What's the best combination? And honestly, it was one of those, as often as not, we would look at leading edge research, Steve, to find out what was out there, what scientists were developing. And it was kind of a fun subject, but it wasn't real, because either it wasn't available, even though we knew it was being researched, or like this, the cost was so high, so prohibitive, that we'd literally have to win the lottery. And we'd end up as one of those lottery winner stories where we won for $100 million, and then a few years later we had nothing left. And they go, "Oh, did you get $1 million?" No, I was using AICAR every day. Think of it this way, Steve. The cost of this per day would be like the craziest something out of a drug movie, the kind of sort of recreational sniffing powder off of naked women's thighs, that kind of stuff from I'm trying to think of one of the most famous gangster movies ever, and he's sniffing coke and throwing his machine gun. You'd literally be having to sniff tens of thousands of dollars a day, and this is right up there. This is like crack cocaine for the price, and you're not even getting high, Steve. You're having to go to the toilet more frequently, and possibly damaging your heart. So yeah, we give you the information, guys. We tell you what it's about, but ultimately, for me, the numbers is they just don't add up, Steve. This just not economical, and as Steve said, availability versus cost versus most of these companies that we talk about, and especially our proof companies, not having it. And if they did have it, how long has it been in stock? Because they've only bought a small amount, and you're the first person that's come along and bought it. It might have been in their place for months before you get hold of it. So yeah, I honestly, I think if I would want the supplier to have to go off and get it from a lab and then supply it to me in that particular way. And again, the cost, forget it, guys. Please note, we are not doctors, and the opinions are ours. It is our view and based on experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.